there again. Um, I wanted to say a few words about Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas has a life that has a kind of legendary quality to it for poets. Um, he uh, he dies before his 40th birthday. He becomes a notable poet in England, though he is Welsh. Wales is on the west coast of the island of Great Britain, um, and it has always maintained a culture and even a language apart from English. Welsh is a language that I find very complex. I'm good at languages. I can't begin to understand the first words of Welsh. They're very multisyllabic, but you can hear Welsh spoken to this day in Wales. And there's even Welsh television, Welsh radio. And it's a whole lot more people who speak Welsh than speak Cajun. And the culture has a connection to England, which is complex in that it contains a powerful folkloric aspect. The tales of Arthur probably came from Wales. King Arthur, I mean. What Wales in the time of Shakespeare had retained a reputation for being a place where people performed magic, that there were wizards and witches in Wales, and who had a mysterious quality to them. And there is something rather delightful and magical in the alliterative verse of Dylan Thomas. When he's still a teenager, he gets a bunch of poems published, and people who are the best poets in England at the time take note of him and see him as a rising star. And he long suffered from a pulmonary condition in his lungs. He didn't go fight in World War II because it was thought that any amount of exertion would kill him. You wouldn't, if he tried to run across a battlefield before anything shot him, he would die, was the thought. And he ends up working for the war effort, writing things for the BBC to support people's spirits. He marries, he messes around, he does some he writes some plays. Mostly he writes for the radio, though. I suppose we have podcasts that tell us stories today, but radio drama was a very real thing. And he does this magnificent piece called The Child's Christmas in Wales, which is, so adorable. I read it every Christmas season. It's a beautiful piece about growing up in Wales and the way children see things in the world really differently than adults do. And it has a kind of whimsical quality to it. We have Under Milkwood, which while read aloud in public, was really intended to be understood as readers' theater, meaning it would be the kind of thing that would do well on radio. They didn't stage it like you would a Broadway play. And it's written really right before he dies. He dies in New York. His career takes him to New York for a time, and where he has complicated love affairs. And I will tell you the legend as I received it of the death of Dylan Thomas. I have zero proof that this is true. What's true is he died in a hospital in New York. I think it was St. Vincent's Hospital, which is now closed in Greenwich Village, of a pulmonary related condition. But it was clear that this was not a man who could handle a strong drink, that it would contribute to his health problems. And there is a tavern in Greenwich Village called the White Horse Tavern. It still exists. And if you go in there, they will point to the place on the bar where he sat right before he died and ordered something like 30 shots and asked the bartender to stack them right in front of him. And he downed one after another, knowing it would very likely kill him. I cannot prove he did this, but everyone in New York believes he did this, the way that people believe a folk tale, which is a kind of part of the form of what makes his work special. There is a quality to it which has retained something that you might have even heard, the echo of the echo of the echo of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. There is an element of magic to what he did. Something to be said briefly about the work I've asked you to read of his. You probably have read or heard a portion of Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. You may have heard this in high school. It's often taught in high school. It's a lovely poem. It's worth reading anytime in one's life. Under Milkwood is a piece of readers' theater, and it takes place in Wales, and it celebrates something other than the upper crust society of England. So much of what we have read focuses on an elite culture that was rarefied. A few poets, William Blake, the Romantics, but very few otherwise, embrace regionalism in England. There are a few. There's a Scottish poet, Robert Burns, who's much celebrated even in England. A few Irish poets that break through as Irish poets. But there is, I'll call it a bias that really the best work would appeal to the upper crust of London society. And we see that open up quite a bit in the 20th century. And part of that opening up is this work under Milkwood. The language itself of Under Milkwood is a little alienating because we don't live like we were in a Welsh village here. But I think that if you imagine a work that were written about, say, a farm town in Louisiana as a way to talk about something instead of talking about what it's like to have an apartment on Park Avenue in New York City, I think you can understand the strength of this story and the dignity of the community he decides to write about. He edifies us with the story of people who are in no way brilliant, rich, elegant, but ordinary people, working class people, a community that is largely forgotten by the rest of the country, but who have something to say through the voice of Dylan Thomas. That it's just beautiful. And this is part of what we see at the end of this class. In the 20th century and the 21st century, a literature that has almost always been an elitist literature and a literature for the elite, celebrating the elite, becomes a literature that opens up to include multiple voices. In the next section of the class, the last section, we read the words of non-white writers who are part of the English Commonwealth who come into England. I have included Jamaica Kincaid, Salman Rushdie, and Chinua Achebe. Salman Rushdie is from India. Achebe is from a former African colony of England. And their voices are now British voices. And their voices, which were once marginalized, are part of the center of the conversation in British literature today, and well worth our attention. Under Milkwood is a delight. I hope you will enjoy it. Dylan Thomas may or may not have died in the manner I have described. In any case, there is something to be said, not for dying young as a poet, but for having a legend about one that endures well past one's expiration date. May you be legendary in your own right, but live a long life.